The following podcast is a Scrum Inc. production.
Welcome to the Agile CEO, a podcast designed to deliver real-world stories of leaders, innovators, and risk-takers changing the way businesses operate. I'm your host, JJ Sutherland, the CEO of Scrum Inc. Today, I'm really excited to have Brad Freitag, the CEO of Claris, an Apple company, to join us to talk about some of his lessons with agility. Good to see you, Brad.
Thanks, JJ. It's great to be here.
So, Brad, before we sort of get into the whole Agile thing and how you've led Claris from one state into another state, can you tell us a little bit about Claris, like what you do and, tell us a little bit about your company?
Sure. We develop a platform. Platform is something that developers use to build software applications. And what's unique about our platform is that it's designed for people who didn't study computer science. So some aspects of our platform are made for faster onboarding. And that's really in order to serve the Fortune 5 million, more the small and medium-sized business customer set that we serve. We're a global business. We've been doing this for decades. And with all the changes in technology, I feel like we have a really exciting future ahead of us.
Yeah, so no, Claris is not a new company. I mean, you're a high-tech company. You're in Silicon Valley, but you've been around for a long time. What was it when you came in as CEO that you said, okay, we need to change the way we're working? Wait, what was the driving force there?
Right. As CEO, the mission was growth, really higher growth than the trajectory we had been on. We knew the demand for digital transformation in businesses, and particularly these small and medium-sized businesses, was massive. And yet we saw competitors growing faster than we were. So, that was a problem we needed to address. As a platform company, our technology is really important, but the reality is our platform does absolutely nothing without a developer who could work on the platform. So we have to build a complete ecosystem so they can onboard, continued learning for the developers. Community is important to the developers. We have a partner ecosystem. We're global. So there was scale that needed to be managed, again, beyond the platform. The changes we've all observed in technology are happening at a faster rate than they ever have, right? As we move from internet to mobile to now AI. And then as a first-time CEO, I needed a system, right? I needed to have a system by which to run the company, and the system, which was largely based on waterfall, was no longer serving us. And I would argue in large part because waterfall was so engineering centric, it really started and ended with the platform technology. And again, the technology for us is irrelevant if we don't have great developers to support the technology. So it was those conditions that said we need to do something differently, and what a great opportunity given a leadership change to introduce that. And so, between Agile and Scrum and Scale, I got really excited about the potential and had a lot of conviction to drive this through, and so began our journey.
So when you talk to other leaders in your field, do they often come to you with the same kind of like, here's where we are, but we need to be able to have a system to run the company in a different way? Is that something you hear a lot?
I hear it a lot, but I usually hear it with that sense of overwhelm that they can't take that on. They can't get it started. I think I was lucky as we are in many cases that I had conviction to do this as a brand new leader for the organization, because I do think that is the best time to do it. I think once you get 3 or 4 years in, and the expectations are consistent performance and delivery and all that stuff, and this is a big change. So yeah, when I talk to other CEOs, unless I'm able to catch them at that point where they're taking on something new, it's usually pretty overwhelming. For those who are taking on something new or sort of looking forward to the next thing, they love it and devour it and they're wonderful conversations.
So as you discovered Scrum and Scrum Scale and decided, okay, we're going to do this. What were the challenges that you faced sort of right away?
Right away, it was how do we get started? Where to implement it? There's so much change is required. What I found was the conviction of a few leaders, a relatively small team, one or two people like totally dedicated to Agile and Scrum at Scale, and bring in, a partner, Scrum Inc., to help lay out the plans and get things moving. Would all help, but the challenges were things like resistance. And sometimes, in some cases, there's explicit resistance, which is manageable. Then there's the tacit resistance, which is much harder, right? Because you ferret it out more slowly and you kind of think it's happening. People are smiling and nodding in agreement as we walk out of a meeting, but you know or hear pretty quickly. They go to the next room and say, "Oh, that thing's garbage." We're not,
It's not the way for every CEO. Whenever you try to do something, everyone agrees with you very publicly. It says, "Yes, that's brilliant."
Right. Yes. Yeah.
So when you started to do this, and I'm sort of thinking, looking back, what would you I'm thinking about advice to other leaders? Is there's someone who's trying to do this kind of change in an organization to really reshape how you're doing things, to move away just from an engineering centric point of view? What would you have done differently, or what worked that you think was really valuable?
If I had an opportunity to do it differently, I would be more explicit about how transformational this change will be for the organization, because it does require getting into the roots of not only systems and process, but also culture and values. And so when you're talking about that big of a change, it really is transformational. It is completely disruptive. And I would have been more explicit that this is what we're signing up for, and establish more understanding for people to deal with that type of change. And that said, I think we did a good job of saying this is going to be transformational, but I think repetition, communications reinforcement has been such a big theme and such a big learning that I would have spent more time on that piece up front.
I want to get, when you say it's transformational, when you were saying, when you would describe this to somebody, sort of like you're going from what to what, like what is that fundamental root change that you're trying to accomplish?
I would take it from a type of thinking, right? I mean, it really is a mindset change, from a mindset, which I guess would be more of a functional mindset, to a mindset that we deliver value collectively to a customer, and if that lands with the customer, we have been successful. If it does not, we have failed. And the success or failure can be measured in very simple ways, like adoption. And it's on all of us to get it right. Right. And so that's the mindset change. It requires, less credit for, an individual innovation, a product enhancement, and more of a team oriented, we have to pull all of this off together. So that's how I describe it.
So why do you think that's hard? Because at one level, it seems very simple. Hey, we're in all this together. We're a company. We're delivering to our customers. If we succeed and our customers, enjoy our product, use our product, get value from our product, we all win. But this happens over and over. And we talked about this before. It's like, this part of the company wants this and this part of the company wants this. And I don't see it as that unified whole of organization effort. Why do you think that is?
I haven't thought a lot about that, but I would jump to a hypothesis that when you're working in your function and your function is reasonably isolated, your rewards are based on whether you sort of did what was expected of your role. And there's a lot of accountability that happens when your component can be right and other contributions can be off, and you fail together. I mean, we are a team of hundreds of people, so you would think it would be implicit that we have to succeed or fail together. But for a long time, individuals are conditioned to think a little bit differently, right? And to think about the engineering or the marketing and those jobs being different. And then in that functional structure, they really are disconnected. In a Scrum at Scale framework, it becomes very real. You can't ignore whether the enhancements matter, whether the new offerings land, whether customer retention is as expected, and the feedback. In a truly connected system, there is measurable cause and effect. And when the good things happen, the cause and effect is wonderful. When you run into significant challenges, the cause and effect is fairly painful, right? You no longer get to say it wasn't my job, right? It's
Now, one of the things that when you and I spoke for the chapter of the book in the new edition of Scrum, The Art of Doing Twice the Work in Half the Time, one of the things that really resonated with me is you said that it was the change management, that it was part that as a leader you found was more painful than you thought it would be. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that. What was it that you think was hard, that surprised you?
There were a couple elements that jump out. One is that several of my leaders had experience with Agile, and they made an assumption that because they understood Agile, Scrum at Scale would be a natural iteration. And I think we all learned that that's not really the case. Moving from Agile and marketing or engineering to Scrum at Scale, connected across an entire organization is such a huge change. So I think that created quite a few challenges for us in everybody's expectations for what would be required, the amount of work, and sort of cascaded throughout the organization. And then I think that the second piece was people had to go through a series of questions like, do I, believe, this is the right direction? Do I think we need to make these changes? And ultimately, am I able to make the changes? Right? I'm going to have to operate differently, which is requires change in skill set or method or operation. And that's, all of those questions are destabilizing for individuals. So you have the combination of leaders making inaccurate assumptions, and then an entire organization grappling with pretty tough questions that get at the core of their job security and in certain cases their identity. I think that the best example would be the engineering organization, because we have a leader who has worked with a lot of these people in the past. He returned to our organization from startups where he had run Agile and have a lot of experience and a lot of confidence in Agile thinking, and was a big believer. But in connecting engineering to how we go to market, how we build out the ecosystem, I think the deep logical processing and kind of the natural systems thinking that he's able to apply to how we architect a platform was significantly challenged by how we architect our system to design and execute this huge global web of connected developers, go-to-market initiatives, platform enablement and learning. So I think it challenged in many ways his patience, his tolerance for others to be able to process as much information as he's able to process really quickly, and then calibrate that in a way that we can all execute together. And so, I think for him, I'm sure there was a ton of frustration along the way. We would have to have really deep, difficult conversations, significant disagreement about any given impasse we would encounter and how we would get through it. And, we approach these things with a unique point of view. And we could only do that by having those very real, hard, vulnerable conversations that lead to emotion, whether it's frustration or anger or disappointment, or ultimately the good things of learning and progress and a sense of, when we see things work, you start to recognize the improvements are happening. Generally, the benefits are a step function. We get this big inflection. And so, that's wonderful. Getting to that point of celebration, which we have arrived to, we've entered that phase, really changes things. But a lot of challenge along the way, and just required us to figure out how to work really well together at the core of trust, vulnerability, and hard communication.
Yeah, that can be tough. And it's really interesting because at one level at its root, Agile is, okay, we're all in a team, we're working together to deliver something to a customer. And then at Scrum and Scale, when you say, well, let's do that as an organization, because that's where the rubber hits the road, is as an organization or it's successful. That is an interesting mind shift.
It really is. It's big, and there have been lessons for us. On our house cycle, we think about where we need machinery. We talk about machinery really is just kind of language and taxonomy, understanding of how to really put a gear in place that we can then build on, like get this foundational gear set. Well, examples of that might be our forecasting, how we forecast the business, right? That required understanding what answers are coming, and, the sales and marketing reads on what's happening with demand. But whenever we have to put that machinery in place, when it doesn't exist, we've learned that it is methodical, slow, and until it's in place, we can't scale it. And so, separating scalable work from non-scalable work has been a helpful learning, but that's also painful, right? When you're running a global business with hundreds of people and tens of thousands or millions of customers, you want to think about, big, massive impact. And in that approach to building machinery, particularly in that internal machinery that is going to scale, you really have to start small. As always, you have to get it right first. I don't know if I can say bad words. You can edit out, but our Agile coach always reminds us, don't scale bad shit. And so getting that right is, we just sit down with a table for the taxonomy so that, we all know what we're talking about, and we're introducing some new language and understanding to any of the different functions. So I think ultimately it's rewarding, but it really is, it's slow and plodding as you go through it.
Yeah, I often say some of the worst fights I've ever seen are people using the same words but meaning different things. And that's when the arguments get really hard. But one of the things that you were telling me earlier was that you were just surprised how much you had as a leader, like you have your one-on-one relationships with your leaders and stuff, but for the organization, it was just this constant repetition. And I wonder if you could just sort of talk about it in change management. I think that, I certainly struggle with, like a lot of leaders struggle with, it's like how much you have to say the same thing over and over and over again.
Right. You cannot possibly overestimate the amount of communication and reinforcement. It's just whatever you think it would require, it will require a lot more. An organization, as you deploy Scrum and Scale, different parts of the organization are growing at slightly different phases. And once you see that area of growth, the others have to catch up, right? I mean, if you get a lift in engineering productivity, well, all of a sudden you're shipping more product enhancements, more feature and more frequently, then the go-to-market function needs to figure out, okay, how do we adapt? Like they're building all this great stuff. We have a responsibility to get out and tell the stories so that our developers understand what's happening. And that part of the change is also difficult. You have to deal with people saying, let's give up on this whole system. It's not going to work. This is too hard. It's too difficult. I think as a leader, the conviction has to be unequivocal, just complete conviction that you are going to see this all the way through. And at different points along the way, push more deeply into the organization to inspect and adapt and ensure that there's adherence to the basic framework.
Right. I know my father often tells this story. He used to work with a bunch of VC companies. They go in, and this is like like mid-stage software startups usually. And he would go in and say, okay, well, let's get the engineers producing, 4 times as much stuff. Right. And then he would say, okay, we have 4 times as much stuff. Then he'd go look at, marketing and sales, go, well, we have 4 times as much stuff. How come we don't have 4 times as much money?
Right. It happens all the time. And they're, the tendencies can be, finger pointing, challenging, or you get to a really healthy tendency of, let's kind of jump in this together. And it's rewarding to see engineers get involved with product and marketing to really explain the enhancement they've built, why they built it, what it's intended to do for the developer. And I think they enjoy that part of it. Our engineers are not by nature, broad sense, huge communicators. That's not what I set out to do every day. But they're really proud of what they built. And when they know there's some, misunderstanding about it, they understand they can get that right, and that drives adoption. Ultimately, that is fulfilling for them. They want to build working software. There's no question about it.
Yeah, that's what great engineers do. They love building great things.
Right.
So one of the things, I know you come out of a sales background, and you're sort of like, you got to talk to your customers. Like that's like the key to any sort of successful organization. In shifting your organization into sort of a Scrum at Scale context, into sort of this Agile at Scale, really getting all that feedback. You were telling me the story about how it really sort of changed some of your engineers, how they looked at who they were building it for, and getting that knowledge in them helped shape what they were doing. And as we were saying, explaining why they were doing what they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as a sales leader for decades, I had an appreciation for talking to customers and understanding objections, which might have to do with competitive parity. I have so much more appreciation as a CEO for that type of communication that happens every day between sales and customers. Right? It is just invaluable. And that's fed part of this vision for Claris to develop the Claris collective brain. So the opening up those information flows between sales, product, and engineering are gold for us. And where we see bad tendencies, it's an engineer making the mistake of saying, well, I'm a software engineer, I'm fundamentally a developer, so I'm basically the customer that I'm building for. But it's in no way true. Right? We build a platform that's designed to be abstracted and simplified for a different type of developer who didn't study computer science, unlike most of the engineers who work for us. And many have advanced degrees. So unsurprisingly, when they build for themselves and take it to market, it doesn't land. So making that in a waterfall environment, that feedback loop for us, it was as long as 3 years.
Wow. That's a lot
which
of
is to
content.
say, right, it was easy for quite a few product enhancements to be completely forgotten about by the time we launched them. Now operate where we can deploy in weeks, and we can do early testing, market feedback continuously from discovery through development, all the way to a go-to-market launch, has just going to help that mirror right in front of everybody working on it. Say, are we building the right enhancement? Was it based on the right research and discovery set of assumptions? Are we messaging it correctly through the right channels to reach audiences that we care about? And with that level of logic, thinking, and evidence, there's very little debate, right? We're getting it right, or we're learning and we have to adapt, and eventually, right, and we will get it right, or we'll stop doing that thing, right, and we can focus on something else, which is also fine.
So you used a term that I wanted to ask about, the Claris collective brain. What is that? What is that?
Right. It's just the recognition that our engineers are incredibly close to the product, right? I mean, that they are at the level of writing the source code and architecting the system. And we have salespeople and sales engineers who are equally connected with the customer. And we have that product team that exists somewhere in between. We have kind of external quality points of validation, like analysts and crowd surveys.
Mm-hmm.
And when we're able to assemble those information flows in a way that tell us if we're tracking the right direction, if we're accelerating towards a milestone, then our brain is working. Our collective brain is working. We're getting smarter. And so, the faster we can fire information and new learnings from one area of the organization to the other, from one Scrum team to another, the better we are, right? The more agile we can be as an organization. And again, to go from a waterfall system, which, a decade ago for us was a 3-year cycle. We got it down to maybe a 1.5-year long cycle, but it wasn't going to get much better than that. To now have the Claris collective brain really working on every few weeks sort of meaningful update to our overall acumen and intelligence is truly transformational.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I love that phrase, collective brain. I'm going to steal that completely. I'm not giving you any credit, Brad. But as a CEO, like one of the things I find hard as a CEO is like you as you said, you're saying it, you're repeating yourself, you're doing it. What do you look for and say, is this actually working? Because all the sales figures, all the other stuff, that's a lagging metric, and it's just that's hard to know what to do ahead of time. But as a leader, how do you know that that's working? How do you tune that collective brain as it's functioning?
Right. We measures are critical and difficult, and so we've tried to build our measures around product quality, productivity of our teams. We talk about happiness or sustainability, and really most importantly, value delivery. And that the value delivery, we look at, as you mentioned, if we look at growth, that's very much a lagging indicator. It's important, right? It's
important. Yeah,
it's our mission. So, but the more qualitative measures of value delivery, when we create a product enhancement, it can be as simple as, did one of our developers write a post about it, right? Did they say, this is a really cool feature? It can be a social signal. It can be, direct feedback through that set of customers who were involved in the earlier development, say, hey, we deployed this. And so we weren't able to do much with those signals in the past. They're now really important to feeding, whether we're getting this right. And we see those as the leading indicators for whether that's going to create growth. It's I think if those early indicators are right, the pattern has been the lagging indicators, the growth indicators, exceed our expectations, and if that continues, then
Yeah.
there's magic there.
So, one of the things in getting an organization, I remember you're a global organization. You have offices in California and in Europe and in Asia. And one of the things I remember you and I were talking about is how do you get, an impediment or an issue or a solution from one geography and one culture
Right.
to another? How has Agile helped you do that when you look at your organization?
And you really bring up a few different points. We have the geographic distance and time zone. So that's a challenge to communication. Language is another challenge to communication. And then culture. I mean, some cultures are more hierarchical and reverent than others. So to have that work, to have that function, has been a significant challenge for us. And so we've invested a lot in what we call work groups that exist out in the geographies. And they're basically Scrum teams, but they focus on their geography and they work really as a secondary support Scrum team to where most of those individuals who make up the work group have a primary assignment to some other Scrum team. And that's been the best way for us to capture the feedback, and where it seems to work well, particularly from cultures where there is more deference to hierarchy, is just hearing from them, kind of a positive frame. What would you like from us that would generate growth for your geography? And that basically uncovers all the problems that they're dealing with. But it's a critical nuance, because if you say we need you to raise more risks, surface blockers, and impediments, I don't think we'll make nearly as much progress. And so there is a level of investment, hand-holding and support that is unique for those geographies versus what we've set up at headquarters.
That's interesting, where it's changing just the language you use of what do you need from us, rather than I need you to tell me what's slowing you down.
Right.
That's
really, it's funny because certainly with some of the engineers in California, I mean, they can't wait to tell me all the things that they're doing wrong. They observe all of it, and to then have it as such a challenge to draw that out of other geographies is sort of unique and somewhat funny.
So, what challenges did you see with? Because one of the things with Scrum Scale and Agile is this just transparency, like what's going on, what's working, what's not working, how do we get better, how do we tighten those feedback loops? But that can be hard for some people to have that kind of transparency.
Right. I had learned this axiom along the way that employees want to be valued members of a winning team on an inspired mission, and so that really framed how I thought about culture. And it was that combination of, being a part of a team and your individual contribution being valued within that, the idea of winning, right? People keep score and they really do care. That's important to them. And then that sense of inspiration, which I think ties it, gets at the heart of culture. So when we set out to stand up Agile and Scrum at Scale, I just thought that would be so rewarding for the teams to have, recognition for the work that they were doing, and that transparency would really kind of create a platform for recognition. Like, I thought that would be super easy, right?
Right. Totally sounds like it. Yeah.
And, but then you kind of have to work into, well, have we established a context for our values that people can trust in that platform, that the feedback will be supportive feedback rather than, you're fired sort of accountability.
Yeah.
And is there a tolerance for learning, for debating, to get to the right ideas? And it was incredibly challenging to push for that transparency. Ultimately, people, there are so many reasons to avoid transparency, right? Whether it's an engineer having conviction that a enhancement needs to be made, despite that showing up in a proper backlog, and they just do it, right? They go out and build it. The problem with that is nobody knows about it, and so when it's launched, adoption's low, or we'll get feedback from our customers that, hey, there's this great enhancement, nobody's talked about it, then we learn about it. So what the system requires transparency, and I think everybody has come to understand that. But we've had to do a lot in our culture to build a tolerance, failure tolerance, right?
Right.
We are winning or learning. It's one or the other, and learning's great, right? Learning leads to.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing where we talked last for the book, you're saying, that if you're talking to other leaders, you say, hey, you got to understand this is a 3-year program. This is not going to happen overnight. And was that a shock to you when you I was like, wow, this is going to take longer than I thought it would?
Yes. It was a shock. And I think I just couldn't fully appreciate the magnitude of transformation, going back to the beginning. But if I could lay it out for an organization just getting starting this, it would be, have that sort of time horizon, and even recognize beyond that, it is an odyssey. But standing it up in my experience, is the transformational part. Then the continuous improvement really becomes, relatively minor. Their behaviors and norms and learnings and adaptation. So it doesn't have that transformational feel. But I think it's 3 years, and maybe it's longer than that, right? I mean, it is a big program shift. And again, for an organization with hundreds of people, that's our experience.
Now, one thing you did mention, and I think this is part of the sort of change management that we've been talking about, is that you had said, hey, celebrate your successes along the ways and plan for that. It's like when I had asked you before, how would you explain that to the people who are watching, like what you would say if someone else is doing this, another leader is going through this?
We had one initiative, one of our strategies, given that we're aiming for growth, was opening up new markets. And the way one of our Scrum teams operate, I mean, as with everything we do, we start small, we experiment, look for confirming or disconfirming evidence, and then we make our adjustments. And so this team operated with a great deal of transparency, and there was enough encouragement and reinforcement along the way that we could celebrate the little wins, right? Getting the first, kind of 10 early customers in that market, giving us the thumbs up and saying there's validation. And then learning a little bit about how to scale to the next 100, and then starting to think about how we would shape the go-to-market messages. And I think we were able to celebrate, each step along the way. Again, some of it was celebrating things that didn't work for us. In some markets we have a direct sales model. In other markets we use indirect. And the breakthrough we had in this new market development around an indirect sales model was probably the single most important reason we had so much outsized success in this one strategy. And so it couldn't have happened any other way. I don't think we could have planned for that, right? Because we had to get the product right. We had to know how we were going to solve those problems for the customers. and make that viable. And only with that could we learn, which route to market was going to make the most sense for us. But we've made a huge effort to celebrate that approach, the creative thinking, and that combination of getting the product right. But in this case, really the strategy about how we partner and how those partners take us to market really being a massive kind of scale breakthrough for us.
Yeah, I think that idea of celebration, I think for leaders especially, is so important because, it's really easy, I think, and I see this a lot. It's sort of like, I know where I want us to get, and that's going to take us a while. But stopping and saying, hey, look how far we've come. Like, we're not there where we want to get, but saying, look how far, that can be hard. That can be hard to celebrate where you've gotten, even though you have a longer way to go.
The measure of success on that one, I think in hindsight, is when people within the organization were saying, look at how far we've come, look at how we're able to operate as a Scrum team today versus a quarter ago or 2 quarters ago. In many cases, I would credit our Scrum masters that they're, when they're doing a really good job in each sprint, in a review or a retro, talking about celebrations, bringing that up, it just becomes a part of the thinking and the behavior, and it must do something really creative, right? I mean, to get everybody thinking and imagining, what's a good thing that's happened, what's a good thing that could happen, shifts, what are otherwise, particularly technology organizations, what are otherwise very critical mindsets, right? I mean, we want to eliminate waste, so we're also conditioned to look at problems, and it can be easier to overemphasize what are the problems and then forget about, hey, where are we actually trying to go and how we get there, right? Which, that requires creative channels, to work for you, conviction, belief, and I think those things are harder to find. So, when you have Scrum teams bring that up every 2 weeks, it creates a really healthy habit within the organization, across the
looking for joy, I think, is so important because it is so, and I see this, I work with a lot of organizations across the planet, and often they'll go start an agile transformation and 6 months in or whatever, they'll say, wow, this is so hard. And they say, and this isn't right. And we can get better at this and we can get better at this. And then it's sort of helping to, it's like, hey, can you just raise your head up and look back to where you were and where you are? And yes, we do want you to focus on the continuous improvement, finding the issues, finding how we can get better, and always doing that. But celebrating where you've come, I feel like, and I don't know if you agree, that it's sometimes hard for people to do that when they're so focused on improvement.
It's incredibly hard to do, right? And I think it's a little bit unnatural. It might feel kumbaya and touchy-feely, and by going through the retros, certainly for the Scrum teams that I'm a part of, it is that counterbalance between the pain of growth and experience that all of us encounter, those really challenging lessons we learn through failure that are the important experience we need, with the support of a team, like just stopping to say, hey, we had a breakthrough this week and that was really cool, or we had a significant setback this week and it was really well handled. We got through that. It could have been, this thing could have continued and become an infection to the organization, and we stopped it right away. And how great is that? And, so learning to celebrate in those moments, much smaller celebrations, but really important for us.
So if you were talking to another CEOs coming in like you did, you're new CEO, you're okay, I need to, and you weren't doing a startup. You were having you're taking over a successful organization that, had a lot of history and a lot of great success.
Right.
What would you say to them? What would your advice to them be as they sort of started on this?
Well, my advice would be be more oriented to a CEO taking over an organization. Because I think if you're doing a startup, like you said, you're not held back, you're not anchored into something that worked well before. But when you're taking over an existing organization that's been durable and profitable, usually as a new CEO, you've been hired for a reason, right? So and I would absolutely seize that moment, get started, be thoughtful about it, whatever system you choose, right? Whether it's Agile and Scrum Scale, but whatever system you're going to deploy within the organization, create vision and alignment around that right away up front, because it will only be harder to introduce as you get deeper into that experience. A new CEO will have to put a system in place. There's no other way to run the business. And for the benefits of rapid change, I mean, if you believe every company is now a technology company, to me, if you're Domino's Pizza, we've looked at that. Domino's Pizza has been a great growth story for the past decade, incredible growth story. Nothing about pizza has changed. It's everything about the way they deploy technology that's changed.
Right.
And so I think every company needs to run that way. And to me, technology is almost like a utility at this point. Like, you don't have the option to sign up with a power company to run your manufacturing. and then to recognize technology is the rate of change is accelerating constantly, and Moore's law is very much alive and showing up in new ways. What are the alternatives, right?
Yeah. No one asks you for, saying, oh, we use electricity now. It's like, No, it was. I was looking back, and there was like during the early 20th century, when there was like the vice president of electrification, because because of course they're introducing a fundamentally game-changing infrastructural technology.
Right, and I imagine you had to hire a bunch of engineers who would wire the building and arrange the fuses and short circuits.
So now that you're a few years into this, how do you sustain it, and how do you? Because people do get change fatigue, right? They're sort of like, okay, we've done this. How do you keep it going?
You're right. People get change fatigue, and we're sort of now really careful to reinforce. Right? In a lot of cases, it's just reinforcing our values. Our values are built around trust, listen, challenge, and commit. Growing into excellence. And so we can put more emphasis on excellence, right? To display excellence, to live by standards of excellence. There's some things we need to adjust, right? And so we frame them in smaller ways of living out our values rather than that kind of disruptive transformational change. I think a lot of it becomes self-sustaining. The organization feeds it once you stand it up to a certain level, and you have just strong product owners, scrum masters, developers throughout the organization who really push and make it work. And part of that is allowing the teams to gel. I think early on, as you're standing things up, you recognize significant learnings. One example for us, we had built our go-to-market Scrum teams initially around personas. And the team really figured out through value stream mapping analysis that they could move more quickly, more productively if they built around value delivery. So the components of campaign to community to funnel advancement to renewal became more logical. The team recommended changes. And so that was a big change, right? To move that many people across different Scrum teams, get them a little bit more organized by the unit of work they were advancing. Then letting those teams settle in and learn how to work together, build a sense of camaraderie. I think that part's really important. There's real loss when you kind of break down a Scrum team and say, your job is your work is through. So there's also some respect for that needs to happen, right? Because I guess it's inevitable. Some of those Scrum teams are going to change, but if you can let them flourish in a longer term state, that probably goes a long way.
So one of the things I realized when I became a CEO is the people who described to me what being a CEO was like, and I had no idea what they meant until I was actually a CEO. That it's like, whoa, this is totally different than, and the words, like people say, like now it's like, oh, now I know what they meant, but it was almost impossible to understand it. So in your growth as a CEO and putting in Agile, what have you learned that you need to change as your leadership style as a CEO over the past few years?
Well, first I totally recognize that overwhelm as a new CEO, where you've been trained and coached and you earned the job, so you think you're ready, but you're not ready. I mean, there's just that sense, the recognition that you're now managing functions that I never worked in an engineering function, and all of a sudden I'm managing engineering. So how you reconcile that, I think developing the confidence to just say, I don't know, right? Like, I don't know the answer. I don't know how to go about this, and be okay with that. I found opens up a lot of conversations with people who do know, and they appreciate the not only honesty, but recognition of their expertise, so they could influence the right decisions. That's been the massive learning for me, and I think it will continue. But it's 5 years into it feels more reliable than it did. It takes a vulnerability, and I don't know what we need to do.
All right, well, Brad, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it and your insight. I always find it refreshing to talk to you. I learn a lot from you. I'm totally stealing the collective brain idea because that's a really good one. I like that.
I just learned it from one of your consultants, so I don't want to say
probably. Brad Freitag is the CEO of Claris. Join us from California. Thank you so much, Brad.
Great chatting with you, JJ. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
The Agile CEO is brought to you by Scrum Inc. In today's fast-paced world, adaptability is key. Our expert consulting services tailor transformations that drive measurable success, creating resilient, high-performing organizations. Whether you're leading a team, managing an organization, or guiding enterprise-level change, we're here to support your journey. Transform with confidence and achieve the outcomes that matter. Learn more at scruminc.com.